Let's take a closer look now at investments between China and the United States with Dan McClory, the Director and Head of China for Boustead Securities. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Rachelle.
So what would you say are some of the key ways that Chinese investments climate has changed over the years, especially for American businesses?
You know, if we look at the longer perspective, and I'm in my second decade of going to China, so I don't go back 4 decades. I just think the openness, and I'll give you something that's very subjective, but of just being able to deal with Chinese business people. So 15, 20 years ago, you were dealing with state-owned enterprises. For the most part, Americans who didn't speak Chinese and Chinese who didn't speak English. You had a lot of bureaucracy. And, you know, I guess the analogy I would come up with, Rachelle, is, you end up doing business ultimately with people you like and people you can interact and communicate with. And somebody like yourself that's multicultural, I think you know this axiom, you can buy in any language, but to sell, you have to speak their language. And I've really seen that cultural opening up, which gives a great catalyst to doing business in China. And we can talk about, statistics and numbers and everything else, but I think it's just much easier to do business in China than it was a couple of decades ago.
And people can sometimes forget that it really is about relationship building. Now, as we know, China does continue to open up, but some of them do still have some major concerns. So what would you say they are for U.S. companies in China, especially when you add this backdrop of these unresolved trade issues?
It's almost a corollary to what China is looking for in the U.S. It's consistency, it's stability, it's predictability. It's understanding that, here are the parameters, and hopefully some of those parameters are opening up more and encouraging foreign companies, not just U.S. companies, to move into China. But I think what U.S. companies really want to see is there's been a lot of outreach by China. There's been a lot of positive undertones, but they really want to see action, and they really want to see the opening up of these markets. And there are some good one-off examples, but I think the more the better. And especially in financial services, where I'm involved every single day, you want to see a greater opening up of more of a market-based stock exchange system, as opposed to one that is very tightly rules-based and has a lot of criteria, which doesn't always allow the rule of the markets, and that is investors and supply and demand, to carry the day.
So as you have these different viewpoints from the U.S. trade side and the China side, is this uncertainty over the trade dispute likely to deter companies from either side in terms of entering, investing, or expanding in each other's markets?
I think so. I think it already has. But as we've discussed before, I really believe that the trade war and the banter about it is really just to set the stage for Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi ultimately coming together and resolving things, and either side having some leverage, some bargaining chips on their end of the table. So, there's most certainly been somewhat of a chilling effect on both sides investing in each other's countries as a result of this trade war. I think it's going to blow over ultimately, and I don't think it's going to carry the day.
And as we look at some of the sectors most affected by this, what would you say are the standouts, and what are the biggest concerns Chinese investors have in the U.S.?
Well, for Chinese investors in the U.S., it's absolutely got to be things, and if I overlay your question about sectors, it's got to be things that are related to technology, things that might be considered sensitive technology, like telecom, like microchips, any type of manufacturing that goes into the ultimate high-tech industries where there have been, discussions and allegations back and forth about some potential breaches of security. And I think we have to separate that from the banter again, from the reality. And, is some of that being used as a convenient masking agent to, again, garner a negotiating leverage? Is some of it actual and real and well-placed? But certainly technology inbound to the U.S. and anything related to acquisitions by Chinese companies in the technology area, there has been a great slowdown, and there are some serious and significant threats to Chinese companies moving ahead in those industries.
All right, always good to get your insights. Dan McClory there, Managing Director and Head of China at Boustead Securities.